What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Adrian Vandenberg of the Almighty Vandenberg. Thank you for being here today, man. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure. It's exciting, man. I
Yeah.
can't wait to come to the States again.
Well, we can't wait to have you here, man, and hopefully with this kick-ass new album, Sin, we could finally make it happen. This album is, without a doubt, the best Vandenberg album we've heard out of all five. Fantastic work. Did you just consider this a continuation of your last album, 2020, or were you trying to like explore more new territory and kind of like push the boundaries a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can tell by the title track, "Sin," that's the longest song I've ever done. Anyway, it's like 7 minutes. Yeah, and I keep pushing myself actually because I've always done that. Otherwise, you run the risk of moving into like a automatic pilot type of situation, and that shouldn't be in rock and roll, you know.
Absolutely.
Then you should kind of mellow out like a lot of people do who have been in the business as long as I have. You know, they usually mellow out. I tend to go in the other direction, as you can tell on this album.
I was about to say, it seems like you get, and I mean it as a compliment, you get younger with every album and not older.
Thanks. Well, yeah, actually, you know, it's a weird thing. To me, it always feels every time when I come out with a new album, it feels almost like it's my first album because I always try to prove myself to myself, basically. Otherwise, I would get bored, or no, maybe not bored, but like I said before, you shouldn't make this kind of music if that excitement and the spark and the dynamics is in there because I love rock, as you can tell, you know, and I've been disappointed basically as long as I'm a music fan, which I am because I'm still a fan like everybody else, you know. I've been disappointed pretty often when I hear a record of a band I love, an artist that I love, and they or he or move into like an automatic pilot thing where you go through the motions, you know, how to lay down the chords and scream over it and some pounding drums and stuff, and at the same time, when I don't feel it, you know, I get disappointed. I go, yeah, you know, then maybe you should not make this particular kind of music.
Well, when you make a new album, because you know "Sin" being the longest song you've ever made, like I've even called like I've called it like almost progressive. I've called you Vanderberg Floyd or Vanderberg Opeth or my favorite was Vanderberg Tree to go along with Porcupine Tree. But do you go into it with a vision in mind? Do you like go into your studio or your songwriting saying this is what we need to do, this is what I want to say, or is it a very you kind of just go into it with no real preconceived idea?
Yeah, that's basically how it goes, and it's just like when I make one of my paintings, I kind of start somewhere, you know, and see where it takes me. It's every time to me, even though I've been doing this for a long time, it's a very intriguing process to see that happen when I'm working on it. You know, I end up in some kind of a story. Oh, wait a minute, there's my finger.
Yeah, no, you're
I'm
good.
holding up the phone
You're
here.
good.
Yeah, it's an interesting process that sometimes it's almost as if I'm looking at it from outside and see it happen under my finger, so to speak. And then suddenly, like another part pops up in my head, and I go, "Oh, wait a minute, this could be kind of interesting to add it to that because it doesn't really fit." So I make it fit, and then it becomes a different story than I initially started with. And I just keep going until I think, well, this feels really good. And then next day or a week later, I listen to it again because I make very elaborate demos because when I listen back to it, I want to get excited. And if I don't get excited while listening back to it over a bunch of times, then I'm on the wrong track, I think. You know, that's how I look at it. And funny enough, I make all those demos on my iPad. I play some Hammond organ with my fingers. You know, you go like whoop, and you program the drums on it, boom tack, boom tack, boom tack. It's like kiddies game almost. But my trap is the trap that I set for myself is I can't stand it when it's not like complete enough. So I spend way too much time on my iPad, in order to get it like proper, like almost like a record.
And there's plenty of worse things you could do on your iPad, so I'm glad you're using it for productive.
Yeah, right.
Um, Being both a musician and a visual artist, because I really do admire your paintings as well. Like I love the abstract nature of it, and I feel like you create visual art that's just as vibrant as every album that you've been on. Is there a similar energy that's channeled into visual art as you do when you're songwriting, or are they two completely separate forms of self-expression? Maybe there's something that you can
Um,
express via painting that you can't do in music, etc.
yeah, it's I always feel like I'm tapping from the same well, tapping into the same well, and the process is not too different. I love to cook as well, for instance. So I compare cooking with composing with flavors, and painting is composing with colors, and music is composing with sound. So for me, it's a quite similar process. You basically start somewhere, and you see where it takes you. And for instance, when I make a painting, and sometimes I hold it sideways or upside down to see what it is that's bothering me, in the balance, or in that's usually shapes and balances. Um, and then when I hold it upside down, I go, oh, wait a minute, there's too much of this or too much of that. And the same goes for music, and when I'm writing, I go, man, yeah, it really needs like a serious heavy chord over here, and not necessarily a riff, or the other way around, where I go, well, those have been a bunch of serious power chords. I think it would be really cool to cut it into, to cut it halfway a riff into it or something. So yeah, I think there are some songs on this album that have more riffs in it than on a whole record from many bands.
And being
I love it.
well, and being such a prolific artist in music, between Vandenberg and your history with Whitesnake and so many other bands, just to name a few, like is the creative process in that different? Like, is it a different mind frame when we would listen to an album like Restless Heart or Starkers in Tokyo from Whitesnake versus Alibi or Sin from Vandenberg?
Yeah, yeah, it's always a little different. Alibi was productionally very complicated because we had a certain budget, and as you know, it was in the middle of the 80s, and we had to compete with band like Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, Van Halen, who made really expensive albums. We did not have a budget, so the producer and me, that was the first, it's the only one out of the three Vandenberg albums where that I didn't produce. I produced it with a Dutch producer who I really admire, and we tried to make a production with limited means that could weigh up and to like the hundred thousands of dollars costing productions that those big American bands made. Because I do love a great sounding album. It's you put in your headphones and you get carried away, and so yeah, it's right now it's somewhere in between because I know much better how to get to that how to translate what I'm hearing in my head to a record. And the first couple of Vandenberg albums the first two were basically recorded live. They were recorded and mixed within 2.5, 3 weeks or something, which Metallica takes longer to just set the snare sound right. I mean, there's it's a known thing. I think they took about 2 weeks for a snare sound or something. So yeah, a lot of bands write in a studio. I'm sure I want to be really prepared because I don't want to fool myself in the studio. So there's different processes. In this case, it's basically a mix of what I've learned over the years, and I love recording some of my guitar parts in my own studio, which is basically a room with some recording stuff. the word studio is a little exaggerated for what it is.
The European use of the word studio. When I've seen plenty of studios before where it consisted of nothing more than a laptop and an M box. So I
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
it's,
exactly. And amazing records have been
of course.
recorded that way. You know, it's I don't know which one it is, but one of the Brian Adams records was partly recorded through an M box somewhere in Portugal or something. You know, he thought, well, I like this take, so you know, make sure it sounds good in the mix.
Hey, you know what? If it sounds good, that's what matters in the end.
That's it, you know, because I thought about it many times and still do, and I always will do, is that people gravitate still to the first couple of Zeppelin records, the band Free, one of my all-time favorite bands, Hendrix, Humble Pie, Leslie West with Mountain. People gravitate toward those records still, even though they sound very 70s, you know, like a little woolly and not that great production. But in the end, you know, I believe it's always the performance that counts, and that's what grabs the people. You know, like for instance, Becker's Banquet from the Stones, you can basically hear that those guys are stoned out of their brain, you know, and at the same time, it's got such a tangible vibe that they go, yeah, you know, there's not the greatest acoustic guitar sound I've ever heard, there's not the greatest drum sound I've ever heard, but the performance grabs you, and that's the art of it, I suppose, you know, and that was the contributed to the death, well, the death, I mean, to a little bit of the demise of 80s rock when grunge took over, because I think a lot of people got tired of over-polished 80s productions, you know, with layers and layers of keyboards, layers of backing vocals, layers of guitars. You basically saw this band perform way back in a stadium instead of what I like is when the sound is really in your face, you know, like on this record, we really succeeded with that. I think I like a record to sound like as if you're walking straight into a rehearsal of the band. You stand right in front of the stage, and you get smacked around the ears with the guitar sounds and the drum sounds and performance of the singer. You can almost hear him spit, you know. That's what I like when you're really into the whole picture.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And I've always said that being a guitar player, I've always said, especially within solos, it's very much like what a lead singer does, and as it's using melody to convey emotion and convey energy and convey like a setting in a way. So when it comes to laying down your guitar parts, do you like prefer to have a melody or music already present before you know what to write over it in a way, or is there really no one way on how you contribute to with your guitar work?
Yeah, over the years I've developed a way where first of all, I always like, which you can hear on this record and all the old Vandenberg records, I like to have a different, move to a different chord scheme. So melodically, I start thinking a little different outside of the actual tune, but at the same time, I want to continue the story of a tune, but try to tell a little story within the story of a tune. So I always think melodic, and I don't consider myself a fast player. There's many great players who are fantastic and faster than the speed of light, but for me, it's a little bit like, I mean, it may sound stupid, but if you really put your mind to it, you can learn to speak really fast. And then if you speak really fast, people go, what are you actually saying, you know? So for me, since I grew up with heroes such as Leslie West and Michael Schenker and Brian May and Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Hendrix, those were usually stories that they were telling. It was so melodic, and it always grabbed me. I can remember vividly, actually, when I bought a John Mayall record when I was about 12 or something, and Mick Taylor played a solo on it. It was very melodic. The choice of notes was really unusual compared to the regular blues scale that everybody kind of seemed to walk through. It was still a blues scale, but just his choice of notes was a little different. And I remember really being taken by that, and all that stuff kind of settles down in the back of your mind. Musicians. I see some keyboards in the back, so I'm assuming you're playing. Oh, I see some amplifiers actually. So yeah. So as a player, you probably you're a player family. You know what it's like. When you get hit by a certain note on a certain place, played with a certain dynamic, with a certain whether it's the attack or whether it's the lack of attack, or you make it really smooth, or you make it really aggressive by making like a pinched note type of thing. There's so much you can do with direct contact with the strings, and I remember reading a biography about Paganini, like still considered one of the best violin players ever. But he considered the guitar the king of all instruments, and he wanted to be buried. When he passed away, he wanted to get buried with a guitar in his arms.
That happened with
So that
Dimebag.
was
I think that happened with Dimebag too. Eddie Van Halen left his guitar in Dimebag Zero,
right.
The black one with the yellow stripes. So
Yeah,
like
exactly. Yeah.
I've heard. I mean, there's a lot of dedicated musicians who just want to be. They're making like guitar shaped urns now too, which is pretty.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty freaking metal right there. So
it is. It is.
But when you work on
Right.
one thing that I've always struggled musically, I play guitar and piano, but like, when it comes to songwriting, you get that spark and that creative idea and that energy, but you sometimes work on a song for days or weeks or months on end. So when you work
Yeah.
on something for a long period of time, does it sort of make it a little bit more difficult to sort of maintain that idea or hold on to the initial spark of emotion?
Yeah, it does. I've had a couple of those moments. I'm sorry, I just had a handful of sesame seeds.
No, you're
It was
good.
not a smart thing to do right before an interview. But yeah, that happens, and sometimes, and then you have like 2/3 of the song that is going to be great. You get a great riff, you get a great vocal melody in your head, and then at some point, it's like you walk into a wall. You go, there should be something here. There should be something that is a little different, but at the same time gives it another kick, but keeps the flow of the song going. In the past, and especially in the early Vandenberg, sometimes I got, I kind of didn't recognize those moments yet. So sometimes when I do hear an older Vandenberg song, I go, okay, I should have done it differently because it kind of loses the momentum here, So over the years, you kind of recognize those points. I think when you're writing, no, there should be something different here. It should be, either whether it's in a solo or whether it's in a song. You feel like you're losing interest, and of course, every musician knows the moment when you're playing your music to somebody else.
Yeah.
And you're watching their feet, and the foot stops stepping. You go, oh shit.
Yep.
So it's
That you could smell that from a mile away. You don't need to know much about music to know when somebody's like burned out with everything like that. I mean, it occurs in the sound and the presence and everything.
Yeah.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is kind of going down memory lane a little bit in the Vandenberg catalog, because I know a lot of people who are discovering Vandenberg now from Sin as well as from 2020, because with Alibi being the last one for a while, people are finally a new generation is discovering Vandenberg. But this year marks 40 years of Heading for a Storm, which is a fantastic album as well. And I just want to know what was going down memory lane for that album. Was that just picking up where you left off after the debut self-titled in a way? I felt like that was really where you hit the ground running.
Yeah, exactly. That what made a big difference though. With the first album, we toured the United States with Ozzy Osbourne, and that was my first tour in the States. Plus, we were pretty big in Japan. We started headlining right away for like 4,000 or 5,000 people, and that experience, especially touring the States, I'd never seen venues that big. It was I remember exactly when we played in it was outside of New York. There's a lot of entertainment over there. What was the place again?
It was with Ozzy. With Ozzy, you said.
With Ozzy,
was
yeah.
it the Meadowlands?
No, it was with Netherlands. We played with Whitesnake. I knew it then, but it was one of those huge venues, and I never saw a venue that big. In Holland we didn't have those, and so the experience of those tours and playing in such big venues and what it did to my guitar sound really influenced me for the second album, and also tempo-wise because. I noticed that some of the tempos that I used for the first album didn't really seem to translate to big venues where you have a lot of reverb and everything. So I didn't do it intentionally, but I realized afterwards, a couple of years afterwards, when I heard Heading for a Storm by coincidence again, because I rarely listen to my own records, actually, never. Sin is actually an exception, and I still play it in the car, and I've heard it a million times. But I get a kick out of it, so I think, oh, screw it, I'll just do it. But yeah, that had an influence, and also I think my songwriting started, moving into a little, how do I explain it? It started evolving to what I'm doing now, basically, and what we're doing with Whitesnake, and the 13 years, almost 30 years in Whitesnake really influenced my view on playing in big venues and feeling the electricity of so many people at the same time. In Holland, I was always used up until, well, actually during the Vandenberg years too, because in Holland we didn't have those big venues. It's a different feel when you're on a stage and that you get all this electricity from the people around you. It influences my playing. It influences my attack, my choice of chords and all that stuff.
Yeah, when you play a stadium like that, I mean, I've never done it, but like the first time you play a stadium like that, that's a massive turning point, and like,
it is
because the sound, the interaction, and it's funny. I watched an interview with a couple baseball players, and they say that it's actually better to play when the stadium is packed and whatever, and because all of the noise is kind of like muffled from the audience. But if there aren't that many people there, you could hear every single insult that people say. So those stadiums are quite an interesting duality. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for such an awesome conversation. Most of all, thank you for this awesome new album, Sin. I can't wait for the rest of the world to hear it. Is there just anything else with Vandenberg you'd like to promote with the release of Sin in terms of upcoming tours, or what else we could be expecting in the near future?
Oh, yeah. February, March, we're going to tour the States. I'm really, really excited about it because my last tour in the States was with Whitesnake, and it's a long time ago. So I'm really excited about it. And I think we're playing New York. If I remember it well, and man, I'm going to be all over the place. So that's going to be a tour of about 26 shows, and it looks right now that we'll be back pretty quickly. I think at the second half of the summer, we'll be back in the States and do another 26, 30, 35 shows or something like that. So
Hell yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
I hope they're all in New York. I hope they're all in New York.
Okay. Great, man.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Everybody, we are here with Vandenberg, Sin. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Great, man. See you next time. See you in New York.